we're going to be talking about the ever-changing landscape of the modern PFAS laboratory, a bit of a love story. So where are we coming from? Really, we're going to start with what could be the last slide of a presentation. Matrices, matrices, matrices. All these matrices that you see here, we actually are supporting. We're doing this right now. But it wasn't always the case. And we're going to talk about how we got to this very complex picture here. And I'll be honest, as Professor Higgins hinted, I have a keen interest in biological matrices and specifically blood and other odd things like that. But how did we get to support all these different things that you can see here on your screen? Well, as you can see on the mountain right there, we are at 2023. And I would estimate that we've got a long climb to go. What do we have to be prepared for as a lab? More analytes all the time. It's somewhat of a space race. We're at 70 plus analytes right now in aqueous samples, but as more analytical standards become available, we are going to follow suit and bring on those analytes. And as Professor Higgins was also talking about, we're going to be increasing the number of classes, of PFAS that we are expected to look for. Again, as a contract laboratory, our job is really to be able to support answering questions that our clients have. Which PFAS are present? How much of this PFAS is present? Which PFAS aren't present? And as we can see by the release this past summer, the EPA is going lower and lower. States are going lower and lower. So we know on that second bullet point there that sub-PPT reporting limits are coming. It's going to be a reality. Where they will land up is kind of like that wheel we were just spinning. Turnaround times are going to significantly decrease, and they just have to. We have to get through a certain number of samples, and the best way to do that is to go a little bit faster, of course, without sacrificing data quality. And so in order to be able to support all these new analytes and matrices and faster turnaround times, we're going to need more tools. That's just the fact of it. So where did we come from? This is a handy chart I lifted from my colleague, Taryn McKnight, and it is a brief history of PFAS analysis. So methods on the top use internal standard or external standard calibration, and methods on the bottom use isotope dilution. Our preferred technique, no matter if it's a PCB analysis, dioxin analysis, PFAS analysis, we're a huge fan of isotopes. It's not the cheapest way to go. In fact, it's the most expensive way to go, but it's the gold standard. So as you can see, we're over here on the right side of this chart at 2023, and we're going to talk about draft 1633, as any good PFAS laboratory talk should. But you can see that since 2008, there have been promulgated methods out there, either that use isotope dilution or that don't use it. And I will draw your attention, right before 537.1 came out, there was this neat draft method. It was draft solid and sludge method that came out, and it was great. It's a bit of a elusive trading card these days, but if you can get your hands on the draft sludge method, all of us in the laboratory business read that method and pulled a couple cards from it. It does use isotope dilution. It uses anion exchange SPE. It had a pretty robust cleanup with that SPE, so it did a pretty good job. But I didn't put that on here because it kind of irks some people. So a laboratory outline. Really, laboratories, as scientists like to do, like to carve things up and decide what a laboratory does. So general chemistry lab might do metals, VOCs, SVOCs. That's still very, very important. And there's loads of that work out there on a daily basis. A specialty laboratory might use a high-res GCMS or high-res LCMS or LC-𝗀𝗃 to get their work done. And it could be PCBs, dioxins, or other persistent organic pollutants. Specialty services is somewhat of a lab within a lab. We're looking at emerging contaminants, and then to do a lot of our work, we have non-disclosure agreements, as I listed there, NDAs, NDAs. And that's because a lot of the things that we do work on in specialty services, we just can't talk about. But I've tried to go up to that line here for this presentation on things that we can talk about. So what do we do in specialty services? Well, first of all, we like to listen to academia. We love when we can collaborate with the leaders in their field, to hear what's coming next, to really get our ears to the tracks, to figure out what is going to be coming next, not only in the world of PFAS, but in the world of emerging contaminants. And then being a contract laboratory, we tend to know lots of engineers, lots of people in industry. So we'd like to bridge with industry, and then we like to push, because if we waited around for regulators, we waited around for everything else, then we wouldn't be our job in listening to academia, and we wouldn't be that forerunner in bridging with industry. So one thing we listen to is toxicity assessments. And as it is now famously displayed over and over again, PFOA and PFAS went down 2.004 nanograms per liter. That's 4 ppq, which was thought to be unachievable in a laboratory setting, but as we'll talk about later on, we did it. I would like to draw people's attention, though, that although PFAS and PFOA are taking the lion's share of headlines, that 2 new compounds now have a HAL, GenX or HFPODA, and PFBS, the butyl sulfonate, showed up for the first time. And these little guys, no pun intended, are getting overshadowed by these really, really low limits for PFAS and PFOA. But in essence, the list doubled. And I think that's a big deal. Before we really get into what we're doing, I did want to take a quick moment to talk about emergency response. I did outline this as our combined responsibility because I can tell you with confidence right now that labs are somewhat coming together. Fierce competitors are figuring out how to support all the things that need to get done to support not only this accident, but whatever accident you can think of. I've seen this recently when that tanker drug an anchor across an oil line out off the coast of California. I've seen this for BP Horizon. I've seen this for the World Trade Center. So this is really something that's not often talked about. But we as the laboratory network do have a responsibility to be able to deploy sampling media quickly, figure out what needs to be analyzed, and in a timely fashion, because decisions are being made perhaps by the minute or by the hour. And I noticed down there that Professor Higgins talked about how these chemicals move in the environment. We're in this acute phase right now with this Ohio train derailment, but there will be undoubtedly these areas will be studied for years to come, and studying how these chemicals move in the environment. Obviously, no one would intentionally release any of these chemicals, whether it be vinyl chloride or AFFF or anything else like that, into the environment. But we can somewhat turn lemons into lemonade by at least studying these in a real environment instead of in a laboratory environment. So we're at Eurofins, we're poised and we're ready. We're actually supporting this at a lot of different laboratories as we speak. So let's talk about the PFAS tool belt. Of course, there's triple quads or LCMS-MS. We're seeing an uptick in the GC amenable PFAS. We're using GC-MS-MS. And of course, as Professor Higgins mentioned, there's the wide world of high-res mass spec. And that could be a LC Q-TOF, that could be a GC Q-TOF, that could be an Orbitrap, that could be something else like that. That's one of our tools that's being used more and more. We have the top assay, which I'll talk about a little detail in a second. Combustion ion chromatography, total organic fluorine is another alphabet soup, which is sticking sideways in this tool belt here. And then, of course, the best thing in our tool belt is our thinking cap. So let's start off with just a brief. We're not going to go into any details here. This is from all these instruments are in our laboratory in Sacramento. That's my home base. We've got a SCIEX 7500. That's a pretty powerful triple quad on the left there. And I put versus GC Q-TOF and LC Q-TOF. And the reason I did that is not because they're competing for work, but more that they're competing for when will we narrow this gap between dynamic range, between absolute sensitivity, between cost, although I didn't put it up there. Because I can tell you right now, we would much rather prefer the high-res specificity of a Q-TOF system than a regular triple quad. But the absolute sensitivity is needed for a triple quad. So I can tell you right now, there's going to be a time when all of us in the laboratory industry are using TOFs or using some other high-res facet. The reason that we perform dioxin and PCB analysis on a high-res Sexner instrument is because the resolution is the solution. When all else fails, increase that resolution, and some of your problems tend to go away. So really what I want folks to get from this slide here is that we're moving pretty quickly towards more sensitivity, but I feel that the technology is moving to narrow that gap in between triple quad technology and TOF technology. What's another tool? Definitely pulled a line from one of my favorite movie series, roads. Where we're going, we don't need roads. And roads in this case aren't actual roads, but they're analytical standards. We really, as Professor Higgins also mentioned, in the contract laboratory, we're really not looking at pure non-targeted analysis. We're not here to find and discover new PFAS or new classes of PFAS, but we would like to support suspect screening. We do have clients asking us, what's in my distillate stream? What's in this effluent? If it was an emergency response, what are you finding? What are you finding in this soil? And it does complement that targeted analysis where we're using all the available analytical standards for our targeted analysis. And for some clients, they really want to understand what else could be there. And that's where we would pull in a suspect screening approach with our LCQ TOFs. For the most part, we would run these samples both in positive and negative polarity to capture the cationic and anionic and zwitterionic PFAS that we could. And we would then compare to libraries to try to help our clients understand what else is in that sample. And another facet of working with high-res mass spec is that you can be a digital snapshot of what's going on in an area. So perhaps the client keeps that data around to show 10, 20, 30 years down the road if contaminant was present at the time when they sampled. And through deconvolution, that's possible. The question was brought up at the end of the last talk regarding the top assay. And this is something that was first brought about by Houtz and Sedlak back in 2012, and then quickly moved to the contract laboratories, to supporting PFAS laboratories as a tool and a tool belt. And we're really not going to go into all the details, but as Professor Higgins mentioned, you're basically taking a lot of that dark matter PFAS that you can't analyze by traditional anionic methods and converting it to carboxylic acids into known PFAS that you then can't measure. And that table there really is part of some real data, but the top assay really has the most strength when it's working. You need two numbers to compare, your pre-top and your post-top. And to kind of go back to that dark matter PFAS conversation, if your pre-top number and your post-top number are pretty close, kind of match each other, then there isn't a lot of that dark matter PFAS that is going to get converted. So it's a way of saying what's out there, kind of poking the bear. Now, if your post-top number goes through the roof, it has a lot of new carboxylic acids, and your pre-top number is pretty low, then you know that you have there's a large precursor population out there somewhere, and you don't exactly know what they are, but you'll know that is kind of the worst case rainy day scenario. And then the other half of the slide is another tool in our tool belt, which is the total organofluorine analysis. And really, the language here can get confusing even by language put out by states. But at the end of the day, what people want is a single number that they can make assessments on. And whether that's too simplistic or not, it's never going to be speciated with a single number, but it does give an idea of that total organofluorine contribution. And I have one more slide on this because I think it's such an interesting topic right now. Again, industry is looking for a single number for assessment, whether that be oversimplified or not. It's a place to start. We thought we would be getting lots and lots of aqueous samples in laboratory. Again, there's a 1600 series method that's under validation right now, 1621. But really what we're seeing is a lot of products, a lot of textiles, a lot of carpet, furniture, cookware, scraping cookware, doing different food contact materials or FCM. But really, this is the best tool we have right now, but is there a better approach? And so I don't know if there's a better approach than we have right now, but I can tell you that there is a huge amount of interest in getting this TOF number, whether it be TOF, AOF, or EOF, to get a single number to make those assessments. And right now it's somewhat of a cumbersome process, and kind of a longer run. And we really would love more capacity, or love to be able to do this in a faster fashion. So somebody's out there wants to pair up and do this, reach out at the end of this talk, and we can roll the dice together. We wouldn't be doing our job unless we mentioned the EPA Draft 1633, and I'll start with that. I'm completely neutral on EPA Draft 1633. It's under its third draft, I believe, right now. This is a method that does use isotope elution. That's great. It uses a little more robust SPE than a general 500 series method like 537. It's using a weak anion exchange SPE that really allows for a little more aggressive cleanup on the steps to polish these samples. And the reason that's needed is because 1633 is a catch-all for many different matrices. Soils, sludge, solids, tissues are all on there. We've had requests to perform rodent serum by 1633 so far. So it really is, it's going to be a tale of two different things. If your matrices is a drinking water, you're going to use a 500 series method. If it's anything other than a drinking water, you're probably going to be using draft 1633 once it's past draft and in its promulgated form. So let's look a little bit at the analytes that are covered by draft 1633. I don't expect everyone to read all of these. These are these are the analytes that you see on the left, and it is expanded. I think it's 40 analytes, if my memory serves me well. But just know that there are established and accredited methods out there that have analytes above and beyond draft 1633. And these analytes on the right are some other analytes that we support here at Eurofins. On the bottom right too, you'll notice now that we're jumping into the world of GC amenable PFAS with the FTOHs, the fluorotelomere alcohols, and we expect that more focus is going to be on GC PFAS and really short chain PFAS and everything else like that. So 1633 is a step in the right direction to increase the number of analytes and to try to increase the number of matrices that are addressed. But just know that we can do some of these things already. What's next? The next frontier is we're going to be chatting about some of these things that you see down here, and I'll try to make it not like a shameless self-promotion, but more just in the arena of innovation. So when those health advisory limits were put out this last summer, I was actually in the room there in North Carolina when it was announced, and there was a lot of fanfare. Some people were really excited. Some people got up and left, never to be seen again. But it's a big deal. And so right away, we started jotting some things down on our notebooks on how to get to 4 ppq. This sounds like it would be for dioxin work, but dioxin work relies on a mass concentration factor, usually a liter down to 20 microliters, something that we're not going to be able to do with PFAS. So how did we do it? So we already have some somewhat modified LCs, our LCs on the front end of our mass specs. So we avoided anything with FEP or Teflon or PTFE or any sort of fluoropolymer. We tried this. I'm not afraid to say that we tried this a couple different times to get down to as low as we could. But what it actually took was a clean room. And luckily for us, we had a clean room in the form of our microplastic lab, which you can see there on the right. That's a 𝗀𝗶𝗶 𝗀𝗏 Raman microscope, which is really, really fun to work with. And this is a positive pressure HEPA filtrated clean room that we had to perform the extraction. And now the analysis, that instrument there is a SCIEX 7500. Luckily for us, as Professor Higgins mentioned, we were already doing blood analyses. So we took our microplastic lab and we took our instruments that we'd normally use for blood, and then we took some scientists flown out on courtesy of SCIEX, and we did what we could, both in reducing background and increasing sensitivity. Anything that you can do to help the baseline, help the background, and increase sensitivity, we did it. And so what did we get? PFAS, we definitely knocked it out to hit that 10 ppq health action limit. And for PFOA, we did it. And you'll notice we're being transparent about what's in our blanks here. Our extraction blank had about 1 to 1.25 ppq in the blank, and we think we know where that's coming from, but we couldn't get rid of it at the time. And we definitely recovered our 4 ppq spike and our 10 ppq spike. So it can be done, but what I'm telling you right here, you don't need this method. Unfortunately, most waters that we would encounter have PFAS levels above 4 ppq, but it was still really a great way to highlight what we can do as sort of a space race. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about air. We have 3 different laboratories in the network focused on PFAS and air. Our Knoxville facility helps write draft or EPA's other test method, OTM-45, and there's other methods coming out around that. We're doing both ambient air and vapor air here in California, and we're not going to go into too much detail about some of these air methods, but I would like to just kind of throw the idea out there that this mystical mass balance of PFAS has been something that folks and researchers have been trying to achieve for a while now. And if you look at the soil and you look at the water and you look at the food, but you're not looking at the air, you're going to miss that mass balance. So just like we're talking about how GC amenable PFAS are going to become a bigger thing, this fits in with that. We're using GCM-SMS for some of the vapor phase methods at our air toxics facility in Folsom, California. And we're tackling air from every avenue that you can think of, some passive sampling thrown in there for good measure. So PFAS and air is already here. It's not coming. Here's a topic near and dear to my heart. As Professor Higgins mentioned, we had this idea to look at whole blood, and this was really twofold. For me personally, I've wanted to do PFAS in whole blood for some time. Unbeknownst to us, when we were testing PFAS in serum, a lot of the clients ended up being children. And as a parent myself, I can understand that if you're going to get a PFAS test done, you might want that done on your child rather than yourself. And at the time, we were taking 2 tubes of 8 mils of blood, which is a lot to ask of an adult, and especially a lot to ask of a child. So this is one way where the caregiver, a parent, somebody else like that can help if the client is a child, is a pediatric client. But really, that other part of it, that the world shut down in 2020, we actually had some traditional serum projects lined up that we couldn't get access to anymore. We just couldn't get a phlebotomist in someone's house to collect both water and do a blood draw. And as everybody knows, things just kind of shut down. So instead of just shutting down ourselves, this is a lot of what we did during quarantine. I gave lots and lots of webinars several years ago with Band-Aids on every finger, because I would be doing a lot of demonstrations on myself to kind of crack some of this code. So what you see here on the left is a kit that we can have, which is both, it's pretty much the same kit, whether it's a research pathway or a consumer kit. And you get the kit. Think of a genetic test where you order a kit, you get the kit, you fill the VAMS tips, and I can testify that all the tips we use are a 30 microliter tip. It's a highly convoluted proprietary material, and it does, in fact, do a really great job of being both accurate and precise, drawing up that blood. After you finish sampling, you drop your kit back off in the mail, and in a couple of weeks, you can get your results on your phone, which that part blows me away. I'm not an IT person, but I'm always amazed at the things that we can pull off with IT. And really, so we're finding now that although this was intended for human use, we have some non-human studies going on right now, and these are part of some grants, and these are part of also private industry interested in sampling some of the biota around these PFAS sites in a non-lethal fashion. So this is great. This is something else that we didn't even think of at the time that's turning out pretty well. But really, this does get back to biomonitoring, and that's really where I think the most power that you can have as far as a society in general is biomonitoring. And the reason that is say you unfortunately live in an area where you might have high PFAS body burden, and you show up day one to a job, and you might get a background check and a drug screen, and you might get your PFAS checked. And I think that's a fair way to do it. So that if you show up and have high PFAS body burden, that you're going to take a look at your environment and what's around you. But that wouldn't be employer derived. But on the other side of things, really protecting the individual, if you're working in and around areas where there are PFAS, you should have proper PPE so that your job, your position, doesn't increase your PFAS body burden. And that's really where I think that biomonitoring can protect both parties. My PFAS career actually started in blood in 2007. So I started backwards from most people, in that we started working on blood. And again, this was just for PFAS and PFOA. And we've come a long way with our analyte list. Now we're looking for 45 different PFAS in blood. But it's an important thing. And I think folks ask me, why is an environmental lab working on blood? Well, as PFAS are exogenous chemicals, they're not expected to be in the body. Your expected level for PFAS is 0. But unfortunately, that's not the reality. And if there's one thing that PFAS labs are good at doing, it's extracting different matrices and quantifying those PFAS they have with isotope dilution methods. So really, humans make really excellent active and passive samplers in the environment. And there's nothing, although there's nothing we can do right now about the PFAS in your body, so to speak. There's not a lot of treatments you can do to reduce that PFAS. At least we can get an idea of what that concentration would be. One of the other things that we're doing is, and I'm sure Professor Higgins is smiling right now, is an extension to his former students on wipe samples. We know that there are many other PFAS besides anionic PFAS. In fact, 𝗀𝗏 PFAS there are more and more studies on 𝗀𝗏 PFAS. This is a PFAS that could have more than one charge. There are definitely cationic PFAS, as Professor Higgins also talked about, that are out there and might not have been captured by traditional wipe methods in the past. Of course, the legacy PFAS, the most well characterized, are mostly ionic PFAS, but really there are other surfactants, other PFAS surfactants that are out there. And so the idea was, how do we capture in a wipe sample all these different PFAS? And that's when we came up with 𝗀𝗏𝗄𝗃. This is a wipe method. That's Domino. That's my cat. This is a wipe method that now that it exists is the most comprehensive wipe method to determine if something's been decontaminated. This really is a method that's designed for hard surfaces. It could be a truck tank, a mobile tank, something like that. But this was refined by our very own now, Dr. Sarah 𝗀𝗃𝗏, who's at our Denver lab, but once was at mines with Anastasia Nickerson. So this is an adaptation of the Nickerson extraction method that we're putting out there. And so this is a great wipe method. I should have put Dr. 𝗀𝗃𝗏's email on here so that you could ping her about this. But this is something that wasn't possible just a few years ago. And now that we're realizing the importance of other classes of PFAS, that has to be addressed in order to perform due diligence. Forensic PFOA. This isn't anything new. The idea of looking at PFOA and especially honing in on the branched isomers of PFOA to get at what was the starting formulation. And although there's definitely a lot of question marks around that, the difference between telomerization and ECF can be teased out somewhat when you look at a few extra parameters. So the chromatogram that you're seeing right now, that unshaded compound on the bottom, that's our extracted internal standard, to use 1633 lingo, our EIS. And the two shaded compounds above it are linear PFOA. The compounds to the left of that, with an earlier retention time, are branched isomers of PFOA. And this is a typical chromatogram where we would have our labeled compound and then two MRM, or two ions of a PFAS. The top ion being the quantitation ion, and the middle ion there being the qualitative ion that has to be present with certain parameters in order to have a positive detection. So what we did here at the request of a client, this was a case where we were listening to academia and we were bridging with industry to come up with a new approach. And so on this bottom chromatogram, the linear isomer of PFOA is unshaded there, but that's I left that on the right so you can see what we're talking about. But what you're looking at is a single injection of different branched isomers. And I've annotated these isomers on each ion. But as you can see, if we were just looking at the top two ions, we might miss some information. And in fact, when it gets into the dye-substituted branched isomers, this is even more informative. But just know that this is one of those areas where we are pushing for more advanced analysis to be able to answer the questions of our clients and of industry. And one other nuance with this method that's perhaps the most important is that we were using different relative response factors or calibration factors instead of just the one single factor generated from the linear isomer. So this is an ongoing project. This is ongoing work, but this is something that we do offer, and we do have more information on this on our webpage. It's one of those things that's not a secret, but not very many people might be aware of it. So the next, listening to industry, listening to the fact that we need faster turnaround times, we've got our hands on an ECHO-MS system. And this sounds like it's straight out of a science fiction book because it acoustically draws up a sample. That's right, it's drawing up sample directly from an open 384 well plate and delivering that sample right into the source of SCIEX 6500 𝗀𝗶𝗀𝗀. And so in slow mode, this can do a sample every 3 seconds, and it can move faster than that. This is a technology that was originally developed for the pharmaceutical industry, but we got wind of this and we thought, well, gosh, what if we got a bunch of aqueous samples in from the field and could screen these in a really rapid fashion, create some sort of heat map for our clients so that they could have, say, if they had a drill team out there or some other group of, some other rig out there, that they could make decisions really quickly and then perhaps highlight the samples that they needed tested for compliance and go back and just test those samples. And this is, although in its early stages, we're working on a couple of grants right now as we speak for this. And you do, even though there is no column, because this sample is delivered directly into the source from your sample, you get what looks like a peak. And if you get what looks like a peak and you can calculate the area under that peak, well, guess what? It becomes a quantitative method. And so we're actually getting a really nice linear response. And we're not quite sure of what we're going to commit to as far as a reporting limit, but you can see that we've definitely got some ample signal of PFAS there at 15 parts per trillion. And look at the time scale there. This is incredibly fast. Now, of course, we are going to be answering the questions of what happens when we introduce more matrix, what happens when matrix overcomes samples, that signal in due time. But this is really exciting. This is one of those things that doesn't sound real, but there's one in Sacramento right now, and it's a blast. So really, I'm wrapping things up here, and one of the things that we have to do, that it's our responsibility as a laboratory, is to make sure that we're delivering solid data on a daily basis on existing methods, but also push some new endeavors. Emerging contaminants and microplastics and PFAS all do overlap. There is talk right now about, well, my water system got replaced with GAC or resin. And if it got replaced with resin, that's great that the PFAS are being removed. But now what is your microplastic constituency? What microplastics are being put out of your 3 million gallon a day, 4 million gallon a day? Those are questions that are going to have to be answered. Emerging contaminants. There was a really famous one now that just came out in 2020 on 6-ppd-quinone. This is a compound that's derived from tire wear particles or from tires in general. And so this is a case where emerging contaminants happen to be microplastics and can overlap there. So really, we can't live in a bubble in a laboratory, and we have to be able to merge new technologies and new ideas with existing technologies. And I think a great example of that is passive sampling. Passive sampling uses usually a small solid media, but it can be a membrane. It can be a strip of polyethylene. It can be SPME fiber. It can be just about anything that you can the uptake for to use in place of a grab sample. And I can tell you right now that if we're still shipping out liters of water in armies of coolers 10 years from now, that we're not doing our job as an environmental laboratory to reduce that shipping, to reduce those sampling size, to reduce all those things associated with traditional analyses. And we're actually we're working on dioxins and pesticides and PCBs and PFAS with passive sampling right now. And I've been involved with passive sampling now for probably almost 10 years, and it's really exciting because it is really taking off. So this is an area where I hope that we can merge new endeavors with existing technology. This is something that I just made up really quickly on myself, but it was mind-blowing to me to look at the first flight there, 𝗀𝗏 and 𝗀𝗏 in 1903, and to think that just 60-something years later, we're landing on the moon. So this tells me that if I was born in 1893, I could have watched the first flight as a 10-year-old kid, and then as perhaps an older gentleman, watch the moon landing. And that's pretty crazy to think about. And really, when it comes to PFAS, if we go back to that first thought where we were just coming out with a method in 2008, and now people like Professor Higgins are talking about high-resolution characterization of complex waste streams, wow, we're doing that right now. So don't wait to innovate. That's all I got.